My boss's daughter fired me as soon as she took over his business, but she didn't know one key detail. I was the only person who knew where her father had hidden the real financial records. The dismissal wasn't unexpected. Vivian had always looked at me with thinly veiled contempt during her rare visits to the office, as if my 15 years of loyalty to her father meant nothing more than a line item to be eliminated. When she walked in that first Monday as the new owner, her heels clicking with practiced authority, I understood my tenure was measured in hours, not days. What she couldn't see was the invisible architecture I'd built alongside her father, Randolph. The real transactions weren't in the sanitized spreadsheets her expensive consultants would review. They were in handwritten ledgers, coded correspondences, safety deposit boxes registered under names that meant nothing to anyone but us. I learned about hidden systems young. Growing up, I watched my uncle navigate 2 sets of books for his construction business, one for the tax collectors, another that told the truth. My father taught me that survival often meant understanding what people didn't say, what they carefully omitted. These lessons felt suffocating then, like being initiated into a brotherhood of necessary deceptions, but they saved me when I needed them most. Randolph had trusted me because I never asked questions that required lies as answers. When he needed documents to disappear, they disappeared. When certain clients needed to remain anonymous, they remained anonymous. I wasn't complicit in anything illegal. That distinction mattered to both of us, but I understood the gray spaces where legitimate business and personal preservation overlapped. The firing was clinical. Vivian's voice never wavered as she listed the restructuring necessities that required my immediate departure. She handed me a severance check that might have seemed generous to someone who didn't know what I knew. I accepted it with the same silence that had defined my career. Walking out, I carried only my personal items, a photo of my daughter, a coffee mug my mom had given me, a plant that had somehow survived 15 years under fluorescent lighting. The security guard, Demetrius, who'd shared countless morning conversations with me, couldn't meet my eyes. But I also carried something else. The knowledge that Vivian's entire takeover was built on financial projections that didn't account for obligations her father had carefully structured over decades. Obligations that would come due. Obligations that only I could navigate. That evening, my sister called. She'd heard about the firing through our family's efficient gossip network. "What will you do?" she asked. And I heard echoes of every woman in our family who'd faced similar crossroads, moments when the systems that sustained us suddenly revealed their fragility. I didn't have an answer yet, but sitting in my small apartment, looking at the box of belongings that represented 15 years of my professional life, I felt something unexpected, not defeat, but possibility. The next morning, a lawyer named Thaddeus called. He represented 3 of Randolph's oldest partners, people whose names appeared nowhere in the official corporate structure. They wanted to meet. "About what?" I asked, though I already knew. "About what happens next," he said. "About what Vivian doesn't know she doesn't know." The meeting was scheduled for Thursday. 3 days to decide whether I would protect the system that had just discarded me or dismantle it entirely. 3 days to choose between the survival strategies I'd inherited and the transformation I'd always promised myself I'd pursue. As I hung up the phone, I realized this wasn't just about revenge or justice. It was about finally understanding the difference between being complicit and being in control. The apartment felt smaller that night. I'd lived here for 8 years, ever since my daughter started college, and I no longer needed the extra bedroom. The walls were painted a neutral beige that the landlord had chosen. Photographs hung at intervals that suggested care, without revealing much about who I actually was. A safe space. A hidden space. My daughter, Lucia, called around 9. She had a way of knowing when something had shifted, even from 3 states away. "Mom," she said, and I heard the question mark in that single syllable. "I got let go today," I told her, keeping my voice steady. I'd perfected this tone over the years, capable, unshaken, the voice of a woman who'd handled worse. From Randolph's company, after 15 years, her outrage was immediate and fierce. Lucia had inherited my intensity, but none of my learned restraint. At 24, she still believed the world could be fair if you demanded it loudly enough. His daughter took over. "She's cleaning house. That's illegal. That's age discrimination, or it's business," I interrupted gently. "I got a severance package. I'll be fine." The lie tasted familiar. How many times had I told her I'd be fine? When her father left? When my hours got cut during the recession? When I worked 3 jobs to keep her in the private school that opened doors I'd never even known existed? Each time I'd been fine in the way that meant I survived, that I kept moving forward even when everything in me wanted to stop. "What are you going to do?" she asked, echoing my sister's question from earlier. I looked at the business card Thaddeus had emailed me. It was simple, expensive looking, with just his name and a phone number. No firm name, no address. The kind of card that signaled discretion. "I'm not sure yet," I said, "but I have options." After we hung up, I made tea and sat by the window overlooking the street. The city never truly slept here. Even at this hour, I could see the corner store's neon sign flickering, a couple arguing outside the bar down the block, a taxi sliding through a yellow light. All these lives intersecting, none of them touching. I thought about Randolph's face the last time I'd seen him. It was 3 weeks before he'd announced his retirement, though I'd known it was coming. His hands shook more than they used to when he signed documents. His memory, once sharp enough to recall conversations from years prior, had started to fray at the edges. "Vivian doesn't understand," he'd said that day, unprompted. We were alone in his office, the door closed. "She thinks business is about quarterly reports and board presentations. She went to Wharton, you know. Got her MBA, learned all the right language." I'd waited. Randolph's pauses always meant something. But she never learned the real skill, the one that matters. He'd looked at me then, his gray eyes still sharp despite everything else that was failing. Knowing what to remember and what to forget, what to write down and what to keep in your head, who to trust with which pieces of the truth. "You taught me that," I'd said. "I know." He'd smiled, sad and knowing. "That's why I'm telling you now. Whatever happens after I'm gone, you'll know what to do. You'll know when to speak and when to stay silent." At the time, I thought it was just an old man sentimentality. Now I understood it was a warning and a gift. Tuesday morning, I did something I hadn't done in 15 years. I slept past 7. No alarm, No urgent emails pulling me from bed, no shower and coffee routine timed to the minute. I lay there listening to my upstairs neighbor's footsteps, the radiator's rhythmic clank, the muffled sound of traffic building outside. My body didn't know what to do with the absence of urgency. Eventually, I got up and made breakfast. Actual breakfast, not the protein bar eaten standing at the counter. Scrambled eggs, toast, coffee that I drank while sitting down. Small rebellions against a schedule I no longer had to keep. My sister called around 10. "I'm coming over," she announced. "I'm fine. I know you don't need me. I'm coming anyway. I'll bring lunch." Refusing would take more energy than accepting. Okay. She arrived at noon with Thai food from the place we used to go to when we were younger, before her marriage, before my career consumed everything. Nadia had aged better than me, or maybe she just allowed herself to age visibly. Gray streaked her dark hair, laugh lines framed her eyes, her body had softened in the way that happens when you stop fighting against time. We sat at my small kitchen table, containers spread between us like an offering. "So," she said, spooning Pad CU onto her plate, "tell me what really happened." I gave her the official version first. Restructuring, new leadership, changing priorities. The language was so corporate, it felt like speaking a foreign language. She listened, eating methodically, and when I finished, she said, "Now tell me what you're not saying." This was why I both loved and avoided my sister. She developed an uncomfortable talent for seeing through the performances I'd perfected for everyone else. "There's a meeting on Thursday," I said slowly, "with some of Randolph's former associates. They want to talk about the transition." "What kind of associates?" "The kind who don't appear on organizational charts." Nadia set down her fork. "The kind who might make this complicated for Vivian." "Yes. And what do they want from you?" This was the question I'd been avoiding. "Access. Information. I'm the only one who knows where Randolph kept certain records. Things that Vivian will need but doesn't know exist. Things that could damage her if they came out wrong." I nodded. My sister was quiet for a long moment, her fingers tracing the rim of her water glass. "When we were kids," she finally said, "do you remember what Dad used to say about Uncle's business? That it was complicated. He said Uncle knew how to make himself indispensable. That's different from being valuable. It means making sure no one can function without you. It's a form of power, but it's also a trap." She looked at me directly. "You made yourself indispensable to Randolph. Now these people think they can use that. But the question is whether you're willing to stay trapped in that role, or if you're ready to walk away from the whole system." Her words settled into my chest like stones. "I don't know if I can just walk away," I admitted. "These obligations Randolph set up, they're real. They affect people's livelihoods, their retirements. If they're not handled correctly, people get hurt. And you're responsible for that? I'm responsible for what I know, for what I could prevent by speaking up versus staying silent." Nadia reached across the table and took my hand. "Or you could let it all collapse. Let Vivian figure it out. Let those mysterious associates deal with their own mess. You don't owe any of them your expertise anymore. They made that clear when they let you go." She let me go. Randolph is retired. He made his choices. He set up these systems knowing they were fragile, knowing they depended on people like you to maintain them. That was his decision, his risk. It doesn't have to be your problem anymore. I wanted to believe her. But 15 years of being the person who fixed things, who kept the machinery running, who prevented disasters before they happened, that doesn't just disappear because someone hands you a severance check. "I'll think about it," I said. She squeezed my hand once before letting go. "That's all I'm asking. Just think about whether you're making choices or following old scripts." Wednesday, I forced myself to do normal things. I went to the gym, something I'd rarely had time for during work weeks. I called Lucia and had an actual conversation instead of our usual hurried check-ins. I cleaned the apartment, not because it needed it, but because I needed the mindless rhythm of wiping counters and organizing shelves. But underneath all of it, I was aware of Thursday approaching. The meeting, the choice. That evening I did something I hadn't done in years. I pulled out the box I kept in the back of my closet, the one filled with remnants from before Randolph's company, before I'd learned to be the person who kept secrets. Inside were college notebooks, a journal I'd kept sporadically in my 20s, photographs from a trip to Greece I'd taken with friends who'd slowly drifted away as my career consumed more and more of my life. At the bottom was a folder containing acceptance letters from graduate programs I'd applied to when Lucia was in high school. Social work, counseling, nonprofit management, paths I'd considered before deciding the stable paycheck from Randolph's company was the responsible choice. I'd been 29 when I started working for him, young enough to believe I was making a strategic move, taking a position that would give me experience and connections. Old enough to recognize that single motherhood meant I couldn't afford to take risks. The job was supposed to be temporary, a few years to build savings, establish stability, create opportunities, but temporary became permanent in the way it often does. The paycheck increased. Benefits kicked in. Lucia needed braces, then SAT prep, then college tuition. The years accumulated like sediment, each one adding another layer that made it harder to remember what I'd originally planned. Randolph had been a good boss by most measures. He paid well, valued loyalty, never asked me to compromise my actual ethics. The gray areas we navigated together were legal, just carefully structured to minimize exposure and maximize advantage. Many businesses operated this way. We simply did it with more precision than most. But sitting there with my old journals open, reading entries from a version of myself who believed she was going to do work that mattered, that helped people directly, rather than helping a company optimize its tax strategies, I felt the weight of every compromise I'd made. Not because they were wrong exactly, but because they'd slowly transformed me from someone who asked, "What kind of person do I want to be?" to someone who asked, "What does the situation require?" I'd become a person who solved problems rather than a person who questioned whether the problems should exist in the first place. Thursday arrived wrapped in fog. The city was a study in gray, buildings emerging like ghosts, streetlights haloed and soft, the sound of traffic muffled into something almost peaceful. The meeting was at 2 o'clock in the afternoon, downtown in a private dining room of a restaurant I'd never been to. The kind of place that didn't advertise, that you had to know existed. I dressed carefully. Not the severe professional armor I'd worn to the office, but not casual either. A charcoal blazer, dark jeans, minimal jewelry. The uniform of someone who understood codes but wasn't trying to impress. I arrived exactly on time. A hostess who barely looked at me led me through the main dining room. White tablecloths, low conversation, the smell of expensive wine and seared meat, to a private room in the back. 3 men waited inside. They stood as I entered, a gesture that felt both respectful and performative. Thaddeus I recognized from the corporate headshot he'd sent, mid-50s, carefully groomed, the kind of lawyer who charged by the minute and was worth it. The other 2 were older, maybe late 60s. One was thin and tall with silver hair combed straight back, wearing a suit that probably cost more than my monthly rent. The other was stockier, ruddy-faced, with the weathered look of someone who'd built their fortune through physical proximity to the work, rather than from a desk. "Thank you for coming," Thaddeus said, gesturing to an empty chair. "Please sit. Can we get you anything? Coffee? Wine? Water is fine." A server appeared with sparkling water in a heavy glass, then disappeared so smoothly I barely registered their presence. "I'm Thaddeus Brennan," the lawyer said, stating the obvious because rituals matter in rooms like this. "This is Cullen Briggs and Harrison Page. We've all worked with Randolph for many years." I nodded, waiting. In negotiations, the person who speaks first reveals the most. Cullen, the thin one with expensive taste, leaned forward slightly. "We understand Vivian terminated your employment. We want you to know that wasn't our preference. Your loyalty to Randolph and to the broader enterprise hasn't gone unnoticed." "I appreciate that," I said, my voice neutral. Harrison, the stocky one, was more direct. "We have a problem. Vivian thinks she's inherited a straightforward company. She's brought in consultants, efficiency experts, the whole modern management apparatus. But she doesn't understand the actual structure of what her father built. And you need someone who does," I said. "We need you," Thaddeus clarified. "Specifically, we need access to the documentation that Randolph maintained. The real accounting of commitments, partnerships, and obligations that exist outside the corporate records." There it was, the ask. "Those records exist to protect people," I said carefully. "They document agreements that needed to remain private for legitimate reasons. Exposing them carelessly could cause significant harm." "We're not asking you to expose them," Cullen said. "We're asking you to help us navigate the transition in a way that honors those commitments. Vivian can't do that if she doesn't know they exist, and we can't guide her without access to the information." I took a sip of water, using the moment to think. Why come to me? Why not go directly to Randolph? The 3 men exchanged glances. Finally, Harrison spoke. "Randolph's health is deteriorating faster than anticipated. He's been diagnosed with early-stage dementia. Some days he's sharp, other days..." He trailed off. "We can't rely on him to manage this transition." The news hit me harder than I expected. I'd known Randolph was slowing down, but dementia explained the memory lapses, the trembling hands, the way he'd seemed to be saying goodbye that last conversation. And Vivian doesn't know? She knows he's retired. "She doesn't know why it was urgent," Thaddeus said. "Randolph wanted to protect her from that knowledge as long as possible. He thought if she believed he was simply choosing retirement, she'd be more confident taking over. But now she's making decisions without understanding the full picture." "Exactly." I sat back in my chair, feeling the familiar weight of being the person who held pieces everyone else needed. "What specifically do you want from me?" Cullen pulled out a leather portfolio. "We want you to compile a comprehensive summary of the off-book obligations. Nothing that would create legal exposure, but enough that we can guide Vivian toward honoring her father's commitments. In exchange, we're prepared to offer substantial compensation." He slid a piece of paper across the table. The number written there was significant. 6 months of my former salary, just for a few weeks of work. "And if I say no?" I asked. "Then we'll try to reconstruct things on our own," Thaddeus said. "But we'll inevitably miss things. Commitments will be overlooked. People who depended on Randolph's word will be left in difficult positions." He paused, "including several pension arrangements for employees who aren't documented in the official retirement program." That detail was strategic. They knew I'd care about the employees, the people who'd worked alongside me for years with the understanding that Randolph took care of his own. "I need time to think about this," I said. "Of course." Cullen closed the portfolio. "We understand this is a significant decision, but we need an answer by Monday. Some of these obligations have deadlines attached." The meeting ended with handshakes and business cards. I walked out into the foggy afternoon, feeling like I'd been invited to choose between 2 equally impossible options. I didn't go straight home. Instead, I walked, miles through the city, past neighborhoods I'd only driven through before, letting my feet make decisions my mind couldn't. The fog had started to lift, revealing a sky that was flat white, the sun reduced to a pale circle you could look at directly. By the time I reached the waterfront, my legs ached and my thoughts had started to clear. The truth was, I already knew what I was going to do. I'd known before I walked into that meeting. Maybe I'd known since the moment Vivian fired me. Or even before that, in the years of watching my life narrow into a role that served everyone except myself. I called my sister. "How did it go?" she asked. "About like I expected. They want me to help them manage the transition. They're willing to pay. But accepting means staying in the system. Being the person who fixes things, who keeps the machinery running. It means another 6 months, maybe longer, of being indispensable to people who will discard me the moment they don't need me anymore. So don't accept." I watched a ferry cutting across the bay, leaving a white wake that gradually dissolved. It's not that simple. There are people, employees, retirees, who could get hurt if this isn't handled right. That's not your responsibility anymore, isn't it? If I have the knowledge that could prevent harm and I choose to walk away, how is that different from causing the harm myself? Nadia was quiet for a long moment. "Do you remember when Mom got sick?" she finally said. "How you were the one who managed everything? The doctors, the insurance, the medications, coordinating between Dad and the rest of the family? Someone had to. Yes, but you made yourself responsible for all of it. You wouldn't let anyone else help because you didn't trust them to do it right, and it nearly broke you." The The memory was sharp. My mom's battle with cancer had lasted 2 years, and I'd managed every detail while working full-time and raising Lucia alone. Nadia was right. I'd nearly collapsed under the weight of it, but we'd gotten through it. My mom had recovered. The system had held because I'd held it together. This is different, I said. Is it? Or are you just so used to being the one who holds things together that you can't imagine what happens if you let go? Her question stayed with me as I walked home. By the time I reached my apartment, the sun was setting, turning the white sky into gradients of pink and orange and purple, beautiful and temporary like everything else. Friday morning, I made a list. 2 columns, one for what staying in the system would give me, one for what walking away would cost me. The staying column was straightforward. Money, purpose, the satisfaction of knowing I'd protected people who'd relied on Randolph's promises. The walking away column was more complicated. Freedom, the possibility of building something new, the risk of regret, the uncertainty of what comes next. What I couldn't quantify was what staying would cost my soul, if that wasn't too dramatic a word for it. The slow erosion of being the person who managed other people's messes while my own dreams stayed packed in a box in the closet. Around noon, my phone rang. Unknown number. Hello? Is this the woman who used to work for my father? Vivian's voice was sharp, recognizable even through the phone's compression. This is she, I said, keeping my tone neutral. I need to meet with you. Today, if possible. Regarding? Regarding some discrepancies I've discovered. Things that don't make sense in the financial records. So it was starting. The careful structure Randolph had built was beginning to show its seams. I'm available this afternoon, I said. 3 o'clock. The office. She hung up without waiting for confirmation. I sat with the phone in my hand, feeling the situation shift. This changed things. Vivian reaching out meant the problems were becoming visible faster than her father's associates anticipated. It meant I had leverage I hadn't fully recognized. It also meant the choice was becoming more immediate and more consequential. I arrived at the office at 2:55. The building felt strange, familiar but foreign, like returning to a childhood home you've outgrown. Demetrius was at the security desk. When he saw me, his face split into a genuine smile. Heard you were coming by, he said. Glad to see you, even if the circumstances are weird. How are things? I asked. He lowered his voice. Tense. New management is making changes and not everyone's happy about it. Between you and me, they let go 3 more people yesterday. Said it was part of the efficiency review. Names he mentioned. People I'd worked alongside for years. Good people who'd been loyal to Randolph, now cut loose in service of Vivian's vision of a leaner operation. I'm sorry to hear that, I said. Yeah. He handed me a visitor badge, which felt absurd after 15 years. She's waiting in the conference room, 4th floor. The elevator ride felt longer than it should have. The hallways were the same. Industrial carpet, fluorescent lights, motivational posters that no one ever actually read. But the energy was different. People I passed looked stressed, moving quickly with their heads down. Vivian was alone in the conference room, laptop open, papers spread across the table. She looked up when I entered, and I saw shadows under her eyes that hadn't been there on Monday. Thank you for coming, she said, gesturing to a chair, more polite than I'd expected. You said there were discrepancies, substantial ones. She turned her laptop toward me. The screen showed a complex spreadsheet, numbers highlighted in red. I've been reviewing the accounts with my team, and we keep finding references to payments that don't correspond to any vendors or employees in our system. Quarterly transfers to accounts we can't identify. Obligations listed without supporting documentation. I looked at the spreadsheet, recognizing Randolph's careful coding system. Each unexplained entry represented a commitment he'd made. Pension supplements for loyal employees, ongoing payments to former partners who'd taken losses during difficult years, support for the families of workers who died on the job before Randolph had proper insurance. All legitimate, all deliberate, all invisible to anyone who didn't have the key. What do you think they are? I asked. That's what I'm asking you. You managed my father's accounts for 15 years. You must know what these represent. I met her eyes. I do. Then tell me, why should I? The question hung in the air. Vivian's expression shifted from demanding to something more complex. Frustration mixed with what might have been desperation. Because I'm trying to understand what my father built, she said. Because I'm making decisions that affect people's livelihoods, and I can't do that effectively if I don't know what obligations exist. Because, she paused. Because I'm starting to realize I might have made a mistake. In firing me? In assuming I understood the business well enough to take over. It was the most honest thing she'd said to me, possibly ever. I studied her, this woman who dismissed me with such confidence just days ago, now facing the reality that her expensive education and natural authority weren't sufficient for navigating the invisible architecture her father had spent decades building. Your father built a company that took care of people, I said slowly. Not just in the official ways, salary, benefits, retirement plans, but in personal ways. When someone had a hardship, when a deal went bad, when loyalty needed to be rewarded, he created systems to honor those commitments without creating official liabilities. That's not standard practice. No, but it created loyalty. It meant people trusted him. It meant when things got difficult, he had relationships that went beyond contracts. Vivian was quiet, absorbing this. And these payments, they're all legitimate? Completely. Just structured to maintain privacy. Can you help me understand them? Map them out so I know what I'm honoring? This was the moment. The choice Nadia had challenged me to make. The decision Randolph had prepared me for without saying it directly. I could say yes. Could take Vivian through the systems. Help her understand her father's legacy. Ensure the commitments were honored. Could possibly negotiate my way back into the company. Prove my value beyond doubt. Could resume my role as the person who held the invisible structures together. Or I could walk away. Let the system reveal its own fragility. Force Vivian and her father's old partners to figure it out themselves, to experience the consequences of having built something that depended entirely on a single person they treated as disposable. I'll make you a deal, I said. I'll help you understand the system, but not as a temporary consultant or a contractor. and not to restore things to how they were. What do you mean? I mean, if I'm going to do this, we're going to rebuild it correctly. No more shadow systems. No more critical knowledge held by one person. We're going to create transparent structures that don't require someone like me to maintain them. Vivian frowned. That could expose... It won't expose anything illegal, because nothing about what your father did was illegal. But it will require you to make choices about what kind of company you want to run, whether you want to continue honoring these commitments openly, or whether you want to phase them out. Either way, no more dependence on hidden knowledge. Why would you help me with that? You don't owe me anything. I fired you. I'm not doing it for you, I said. I'm doing it because I'm tired of being the only person who knows how things actually work. I'm tired of being indispensable in a way that keeps me trapped. And because those people your father made commitments to, they deserve better than a system that could collapse because one person leaves. Vivian studied me for a long moment. What would you want in return? An equity stake. Not controlling, but significant. A formal role in restructuring the company. An authority to hire the people we'll need to make this work. Not just to maintain the old systems, but to build new ones. That's ambitious. You asked what I want. That's my price for helping you understand what you've inherited. She stood, walked to the window overlooking the city. I could see her weighing options, calculating risks, trying to determine if she could trust me or find another way forward. Finally, she turned back. I'll need to discuss this with the board, and with my father's former partners. They still hold non-voting shares. Thaddeus Brennan, Cullen Briggs, and Harrison Page, I said. They met with me yesterday. They want the same thing you do, access to the information, but they're thinking about preservation, not transformation. You've been busy this week. I've been deciding what kind of person I want to be, what kind of work actually matters to me. Vivian returned to the table, closed her laptop. Give me until Monday. I'll talk to the board, to the partners. We'll see if we can make this work. Fair enough. I stood to leave, but she stopped me. Can I ask you something? Sure. Why did you stay with my father for 15 years? You're clearly capable of more than just managing his hidden systems. Why didn't you leave? Build your own thing. The question surprised me with its perceptiveness. Because I was afraid, I said honestly. Afraid of instability, of taking risks when I had a daughter depending on me. And because your father valued me in a way that felt rare. He trusted me with things he didn't trust others with. That's a powerful thing, being trusted. But being indispensable isn't the same as being free. And I'm realizing I want freedom more than I want to be needed. That weekend passed in a strange suspension. I didn't hear from Vivian or Thaddeus or any of Randolph's associates. I used the time to do something I hadn't done in years. I imagined what I actually wanted. Not what was responsible or strategic or safest, but what would make me feel alive, engaged. Like my work mattered in ways beyond maintaining someone else's careful architecture. Saturday, I visited my mom. She lived in a retirement community about 40 minutes away, independent but with access to care when she needed it. We had coffee in her small living room, surrounded by photographs of her grandchildren, plants she tended with obsessive devotion, books she'd always meant to read. You look different, she said, studying me with the unnerving perception that mothers never lose. Different how? Less tired. Or maybe differently tired. Like you've been carrying something heavy and finally set it down. I told her about the firing, about the meetings, about the choice I'd presented to Vivian. She listened without interrupting, her hands wrapped around her coffee mug in that way that meant she was thinking carefully about what to say. Your father, she finally said. He spent his whole life doing what seemed responsible. Working a steady job, providing for the family, never taking risks, and he was miserable in ways he never admitted, even to himself. This surprised me. My parents' marriage had always seemed solid, if not passionate. He never said anything. No, but I knew. I could see it in how he moved through the world, like he was always performing a role rather than living a life. She set down her mug. When he died, one of my biggest regrets was that I never pushed him to want more, to take risks, to find work that actually fed his soul instead of just paying the bills. You couldn't make him do that. No, but I could have modeled it, could have shown him it was possible. She reached over and took my hand. I'm proud of you for not accepting the deal those men offered, for demanding something better. I don't know if Vivian will agree to it. That almost doesn't matter. What matters is you asked. You put a vision into the world of what you actually want, rather than just accepting what you're offered. Monday morning, Thaddeus called. Vivian told us about your conversation, about your proposal, and the partners aren't happy. They wanted a simple solution. You provide the information, we compensate you, everyone moves on. I know what they wanted, but I'll be honest with you, he continued. Vivian is considering it. She sees the logic in what you're proposing, and she's smart enough to recognize that the old system was unsustainable. What does that mean practically? It means we're having a meeting tomorrow. All of us. Vivian, the partners, the board members who need to approve any equity changes. They want to hear your proposal directly. I'm not negotiating down from what I asked for. Understood. Come prepared to explain exactly how you'd structure the transition. What you'd need, how long it would take, what the outcome would look like. After hanging up, I spent the rest of the day preparing. Not just slides and documents, though I created those, but preparing internally, reminding myself that walking away was still an option, that I didn't need this opportunity more than they needed me. That evening, Lucia called. I heard from Grandma about what's happening. Mom, I'm so proud of you, hearing that from my daughter. The person I'd spent 2 decades trying to protect and provide for, often at the cost of my own dreams, cracked something open in my chest. I'm scared, I admitted. What if they say no? What if I've overplayed my hand? Then you walk away and build something else. You're not the same person you were 3 weeks ago. You've already changed. This is just figuring out what shape that change takes. The meeting was Tuesday at 10 in the morning, same building, different conference room. Larger this time, with a long table and 15 chairs. When I arrived, most were already occupied. Vivian sat at the head of the table. To her right were Thaddeus, Cullen, and Harrison, the partners I'd met with last week. Around the table were 5 board members I recognized from occasional meetings, plus 2 people I didn't know, likely the consultants Vivian had brought in. I took the empty seat at the opposite end of the table from Vivian, a deliberate choice, positioning myself as a peer rather than a supplicant. "Thank you all for coming," Vivian began. "We're here to discuss a proposal that affects the future structure of the company. As you know, the transition from my father's leadership has revealed some complications in how the business has been managed. We need to address these in a way that's both transparent and protects existing commitments." She nodded to me. "I've invited our former financial manager to present a proposal for how to move forward." I opened my laptop, connected to the projector. The first slide was simple: transitioning from hidden architecture to transparent infrastructure. "For the past 15 years," I began, "this company has operated with 2 parallel systems, one official, documented in standard corporate records, one unofficial, documented in ways that provided privacy and flexibility for commitments Randolph made based on relationships and loyalty." I clicked to the next slide, showing a diagram of the hidden system. Not details, just structure. This system served important purposes. It allowed the company to honor obligations that didn't fit neatly into standard categories. It created loyalty and trust, but it also created fragility. It meant the company's actual obligations were known only to a few people. "We're aware of the problem," Cullen interjected. "The question is the solution." "The solution isn't simply documenting the hidden system," I said. "That would just create legal exposure, without solving the underlying fragility. The solution is restructuring these commitments into standard, transparent programs that don't depend on any single person's knowledge." I walked them through it. Converting informal pension supplements into formal programs, transitioning ongoing support commitments into structured benefits, creating documentation systems that multiple people could access and maintain. "This will take approximately 6 months," I said. "It requires cooperation from everyone at this table. You'll need to make decisions about which commitments to honor going forward, which to phase out, and how to structure new policies that prevent these hidden systems from developing again." "And your role in this?" Harrison asked. "I'll lead the restructuring, but I'm not interested in being a temporary consultant. If I'm going to rebuild this company's infrastructure, I want equity, 5%, non-dilutable. And a formal role as Director of Operations, reporting directly to the CEO." The room was silent. I could see board members exchanging glances, Cullen's jaw tightening, Vivian's face carefully neutral. "That's a significant ask," one of the board members, a woman named Patricia who'd been with the company since before Randolph, finally said. "Particularly for work that's essentially documenting systems that already exist." "I'm not documenting what exists," I said. "I'm building what should exist. There's a difference, and if you think you can do this without me, you're welcome to try. But you should know, the hidden system is more complex than you realize. Randolph didn't just keep information private. He encrypted it, distributed it across multiple locations, created dependencies that only make sense if you understand the full picture." "That sounds like extortion," Cullen said sharply. "It's information asymmetry," I replied. "The same asymmetry that led you to offer me 6 months' salary last week to help you navigate the transition. The difference is, I'm proposing we eliminate the asymmetry permanently rather than just managing it." Vivian spoke up. "I think the proposal has merit. Not because we're being forced into it, but because the underlying point is correct. We can't build a sustainable company on hidden knowledge. That said, 5% equity feels high. Then make a counteroffer, 3%. Vesting over 3 years, and you serve in the Director of Operations role for at least 2 years before we revisit the equity question." I considered it. 3% was still significant. The vesting structure meant I'd have to stay and see it through, but it also meant I'd be genuinely invested in the company's success, not just managing someone else's problems. "I can work with 3%, I said, "but I need autonomy in how the restructuring happens. I'm not interested in being second-guessed by consultants or having to get approval for every operational decision." "You'll report to me," Vivian said. "Monthly updates on progress, quarterly reviews with the board, but operational autonomy within that framework." I looked around the table. The board members seemed thoughtful, not hostile. The partners were clearly unhappy. This wasn't the simple solution they'd wanted, but Thaddeus gave me a small nod that suggested he saw the logic. "Then I accept," I said. The formal paperwork took 2 weeks. Lawyers reviewed everything. Contracts were drafted and revised. Equity agreements were structured to protect everyone's interests. During that time, I started the actual work, cataloging the hidden systems, reaching out to people who'd benefited from Randolph's private commitments, beginning to design the new infrastructure. It was harder than I'd anticipated. Not technically, I understood the systems well enough, but emotionally. Each conversation revealed stories I hadn't fully known. The warehouse manager whose daughter's medical expenses Randolph had quietly covered when insurance failed. The retired accountant who'd taken a financial hit during the 2008 recession and whom Randolph had supported for years afterward. The family of a young employee who died in a car accident, whose college funds Randolph had maintained without fanfare. These weren't just financial transactions. They were acts of care that Randolph had woven into the company's hidden architecture. One evening, about 3 weeks into the process, I visited Randolph. He lived in a care facility now, the kind that tries not to feel institutional, but can't quite escape it. Vivian had given me his room number and warned me that his good days were becoming rarer. I found him in the common room, staring out a window at the garden. When I said his name, he turned slowly, and for a moment I saw no recognition. Then something shifted in his eyes. "You came," he said. "I wanted to tell you what I'm doing, with the company." He gestured to a chair beside him. I sat and told him about the restructuring, about Vivian's agreement, about my plan to transform the hidden systems into transparent infrastructure. He listened with the kind of attention that flickered in and out, sometimes sharp, sometimes distant. When I finished, he was quiet for a long time. Finally, he spoke. "I knew it would fall apart when I left. That's why I gave you all those pieces, so you could decide what to do with them." He looked at me directly, and in that moment, he seemed completely present. "I was selfish. I made you complicit in something that would burden you. I'm sorry for that. You trusted me. I trapped you. There's a difference. He reached for my hand, his grip weak but deliberate. But you found a way out. A way that doesn't just serve you but fixes what I broke. That's better than I deserved. You helped a lot of people, Randolph, in ways that only I could see. That's ego, not virtue. He smiled sadly. You're doing it better. Making it so everyone can see so it doesn't depend on secrets. Before I left, he said one more thing. Tell Vivienne I'm proud of her for being brave enough to change things. The restructuring took exactly 6 months, as I'd projected. We converted 16 separate informal commitments into 3 new formal programs, an enhanced retirement benefit for long-term employees, a hardship fund that could be accessed with documentation and oversight, and a foundation that would continue supporting causes Randolph had championed privately. The process required dozens of meetings, countless hours of documentation, and more than a few difficult conversations with people who'd benefited from the old system's opacity and weren't thrilled about transparency. But by the end of it, the company had infrastructure that multiple people understood and could maintain. No single person held all the knowledge. No critical systems depended on hidden information. Vivienne proved to be a better partner than I'd anticipated. She pushed back when my proposals seemed unrealistic, supported me when board members questioned the pace of change, and gradually developed her own understanding of what her father had built, both its strengths and its weaknesses. About 4 months into the restructuring, she asked me to have coffee. We'd developed a functional working relationship by then, but it was still largely professional. I wanted to apologize, she said once we were settled in her office with actual coffee, not the conference room performance, for how I handled your termination. I was arrogant. I thought I understood the business because I understood finance and management principles. I didn't understand relationships, trust, or the human infrastructure that actually makes a company work. You were doing what seemed logical given the information you had, I said. No, I was doing what felt powerful. There's a difference. She set down her cup. I'd spent my whole life watching my father be this larger-than-life figure. Everyone respected him, trusted him, came to him for solutions. When I took over, I wanted to prove I could do it differently, that I didn't need the old systems or the old relationships. And now? Now I understand that you can't just discard what came before and expect things to work. You have to transform it, which is what you've been teaching me these past months, whether you realized it or not. After that conversation, something shifted. We became actual collaborators rather than just professional colleagues. Vivienne started bringing me into strategic decisions beyond the restructuring, asking my opinion on directions for the company, treating me like a genuine partner. The transformation wasn't just happening in the company, it was happening in me. For years, I defined myself through work, through being the person who knew things, who solved problems, who kept systems running. Now I was learning to define myself through vision, through building rather than just maintaining, through creating infrastructure that would outlast my involvement. I started sleeping better. The anxiety that had been my constant companion for years, the low-level stress of being the only person who could prevent disaster, began to ease, not completely, but enough that I noticed its absence. Lucia came to visit during Christmas. We sat in my apartment, now decorated with art I'd actually chosen rather than furniture that was merely functional, drinking wine and talking in the easy way that comes when you're not constantly performing competence. You're different, Mom, she said, lighter somehow. I'm not responsible for everything anymore. Or I'm responsible for different things I chose rather than things that were handed to me. Do you regret the 15 years with Randolph? I considered the question carefully. No, they taught me things I needed to know. But I do regret how I let them define me, how I let being indispensable become my entire identity. What would you tell your younger self, the woman who took that job 20-something years ago? That being needed isn't the same as being valued. That survival strategies that work in one season become traps in another. And that transformation is always possible, but it requires being willing to disappoint people who've gotten used to you being a certain way. 8 months after being fired, I stood in front of the company at our quarterly all-hands meeting. Vivienne had asked me to present the results of the restructuring, to explain what had changed and why. I looked out at faces I'd known for years mixed with new people Vivienne had hired. Demetrius was there, several rows back, giving me a subtle thumbs up. Patricia from the board sat in the front, taking notes. Employees whose pensions were now secure, whose hardship needs would be met through formal channels rather than secret negotiations. When I started working here 15 years ago, I began. I learned to navigate 2 sets of systems, one visible, one hidden. I became very good at managing the hidden ones, so good that eventually I was the only person who could. I clicked to the first slide. That was dangerous, not because the hidden systems were bad, many served important purposes, but because they made the company fragile. They meant knowledge was concentrated in ways that created risk. I walked them through what we'd built, the new programs, the transparent documentation, the distributed knowledge that meant no single person was indispensable anymore. Some of you might wonder why we did this, I said. Why we took systems that worked and made them more complicated through formalization. The answer is because this protects you. It means your benefits don't depend on relationships or hidden agreements. They're documented, guaranteed, accessible. At the end, people applauded. Not the polite applause of obligation, but the kind that suggested genuine appreciation. Afterward, several employees came up to thank me, to tell me stories of how Randolph had helped them, how the new systems ensured those commitments wouldn't disappear. One woman, who worked in accounting, pulled me aside. My mom worked here 20 years ago, she said. When she got sick, Mr. Randolph made sure her insurance covered everything, even things that weren't technically covered. But it was all informal. She always worried about what would happen if he left, if someone new came in who didn't know about the arrangement. And now? Now I can see it in the system. It's documented. I know it won't disappear. Her eyes were shining. Thank you for that, for making kindness systematic instead of exceptional. That phrase stayed with me, making kindness systematic. It was a better description of what we'd done than any of my presentations had captured. A year after the firing, I sat in my office, an actual office now, with windows and a door and my name on the directory, reviewing proposals for expanding the hardship fund. Vivian knocked and entered without waiting for permission, which had become her habit. Harrison Page is retiring, she said, selling his shares back to the company. I heard. Which means we're restructuring the board. We need someone who understands operations, not just finance. She smiled. Someone who's proven they can transform systems rather than just maintain them. I understood what she was offering. A board seat. A different kind of power than I'd ever had before. Not the power of hidden knowledge, but the power of legitimate authority. I'm interested, I said. Good. Because I already told the board I was nominating you. She settled into the chair across from my desk. Can I ask you something? Always. Do you ever regret not taking the deal Thaddeus offered? The simple consulting arrangement? It would have been easier. Less risk. I thought about the woman I'd been a year ago, sitting in my apartment with that box of belongings, feeling defeated and uncertain, not knowing yet that the ending I'd experienced was actually a threshold. No, I said. That deal would have kept me in the role I'd always played, the person who fixes things for other people. This past year, I've learned to build things for everyone, including myself. That's worth every uncomfortable moment of negotiation, every risk I took. What changed? Vivian asked. Between being the person who accepts what she's offered and the person who demands what she deserves? I stopped believing my value was determined by how much I could tolerate. Started believing it was determined by what I could create. Randolph died on a Tuesday in spring. The dementia had progressed faster than anyone anticipated, and in the end, he slipped away quietly in his sleep. The funeral was well attended. Employees past and present, business associates, family members I'd never met. Vivian gave a eulogy that was honest about her father's complexities, his brilliance and his flaws, his generosity and his need to control. My father built something remarkable, she said, but he built it in a way that depended too much on secrecy, on hidden knowledge, on systems that only a few people understood. He knew this was unsustainable, which is why in his final years of clarity, he prepared someone to transform what he'd created into something better. She looked directly at me. He chose well. After the service, I stood alone in the cemetery for a while, thinking about the 15 years I'd spent protecting Randolph's systems and the year I'd spent dismantling them. Both felt necessary. Both had shaped me in ways I was still understanding. My sister found me there. You okay? Yeah, just thinking about complexity. How people are never just one thing. Not heroes, not villains, not saints, not sinners. Just humans making choices that seem right in the moment, building systems that reflect their values and their fears. He was lucky to have you, Nadia said. I was lucky to have him too. Not in the ways I thought at the time, but in the ways that matter now. He taught me about power, both how to hold it and how to transform it. 2 years after the firing, I stood in front of a room full of graduate students. The business school had invited me to speak about organizational transformation, about navigating change when systems resist it. I told them about Randolph's company, about the hidden architecture and the restructuring, about the choice I'd faced, to preserve or to transform, and what I'd learned from choosing the harder path. The systems we inherit, I said, they're rarely purely good or purely bad. They're usually both. They served purposes, solved problems, created stability, but they also created dependencies, concentrated power, made certain people indispensable in ways that actually weakened the whole. A student raised her hand. How do you know when to preserve a system versus when to dismantle it? You ask whether it serves everyone or just a few, whether it could survive without any single person, whether it creates transparency or requires secrecy. And most importantly, you ask who benefits from keeping things the way they are. After the lecture, several students approached with questions. One young woman lingered after the others left. I work for a company now that sounds a lot like what you described, she said, where there's official systems and unofficial ones, where certain people have all the knowledge, and everyone else is just supposed to trust that things are being handled correctly. And you're wondering what to do? She nodded. I'm not senior enough to change anything, but I'm uncomfortable being part of a system I don't fully understand. Start documenting what you learn, I said. Not to expose anyone, but to understand the full picture yourself. And when opportunities come, and they will, be ready to ask for more than you're offered. Be ready to demand transformation rather than accepting preservation. Is that what you did? Eventually. But it took me 15 years to get there. You don't have to wait that long. 5 years after the firing, the company held its annual celebration. We'd grown. New employees, new markets, new programs that extended Randolph's vision in ways he never anticipated. Vivian and I stood together at the edge of the room, watching people mingle and celebrate. We'd become genuine friends in the way that happens when you've been through transformation together. Do you ever think about what would have happened if you'd just taken Thaddeus's deal? She asked, given them the information and walked away? Sometimes, but I don't think it would have ended well. The system would have continued, just with different people managing it. The fragility would have remained, and you would have stayed trapped in the role of being the secret keeper. Exactly. A new employee approached, young, ambitious, asking smart questions about the company's structure. After she left, Vivian smiled. She reminds me of you, the way you must have been when you started. I hope she's smarter. I hope she doesn't wait 15 years to realize she can demand better. We're creating systems that teach people they can demand better, Vivian said. That's your real legacy here. Not the documentation or the new programs, though those matter, but changing the culture from one that rewards silent compliance to one that rewards thoughtful transformation. 10 years after the firing, I stepped down from my operational role. Not retiring, I was only in my early 50s, but transitioning to focus exclusively on board work and consulting with other companies navigating similar transformations. Lucia had followed her own path into social work, using her Wharton degree in ways I never imagined possible. She called the night before my last day. How does it feel? She asked. Leaving after everything you built? Like completion, I said. I came in as someone who maintained other people's systems. I'm leaving as someone who built systems that will outlast me. That feels right. What's next for you? I'm not sure yet, but for the first time in my adult life, I get to choose without the weight of being indispensable pressing down on me. I get to want things because I want them, not because other people need me to want them. That sounds like freedom. It is. It's terrifying and exhilarating and everything I should have demanded years ago. My last day at the office, the staff threw a party. People shared stories, gave speeches, presented me with gifts that showed they'd actually paid attention to who I was beyond my role. Demetrius, now head of security, gave a toast about the morning conversations we used to have, about how I'd always treated him like his perspective mattered. She never made you feel small, he said, even when she was the one with all the knowledge, all the power. That's rare. That's worth celebrating. As I left the building for the last time as an employee, I paused in the lobby. The same fluorescent lights, the same industrial carpet, the same revolving doors, but I was different. Not just older, but transformed in ways that went deeper than job titles or equity shares. I'd learned that being indispensable was a trap disguised as value. That real power came not from hoarding knowledge, but from building systems that distributed it. That transformation required being willing to disappoint people who'd gotten comfortable with you playing a certain role. And I'd learned that it's never too late to demand better, to refuse the easy path of preservation and choose the harder work of transformation. 15 years after the firing, which is how I still mark time, measuring my life in before and after that moment, I sat in a coffee shop writing. The memoir had been Nadia's idea. You have a story people need to hear, she'd said, about navigating systems built by men for men, about transforming them without destroying yourself, about finding agency in spaces that were designed to make you complicit. I'd resisted at first. My story didn't feel exceptional, but the more I talked to other women, other people who'd spent years being indispensable in ways that kept them trapped, the more I realized my experience wasn't unique. The details differed, but the pattern was the same. The manuscript was nearly finished. I'd written about Randolph, about Vivian, about the choice I'd made to demand transformation rather than accept preservation, but the final chapter had eluded me. I couldn't figure out how to end it. Then one morning, walking through the city where I still lived, I saw a woman standing outside an office building. She was holding a box, the kind you use when you've been let go, when 15 years of your professional life has been reduced to personal belongings that fit in cardboard. She looked defeated, but she also looked thoughtful, like she was starting to understand that this ending might actually be a threshold. I walked over. Are you okay? She looked at me, surprised. I just got fired. I'm sorry. How long did you work there? 12 years. They said it was restructuring, but really it's because the new owner wanted to bring in her own people. I felt the echo of my own experience, the particular pain of loyalty being treated as disposable. What will you do? I don't know yet. I'm still processing. Can I tell you something that might not make sense right now but might matter later? She nodded. Whatever you knew how to do in that job, whatever made you valuable, you get to decide what you do with that knowledge now. You can use it to find another job just like the one you lost, or you can use it to build something different, something that doesn't trap you in being indispensable. I don't understand. You will, I said. When you're ready to stop asking what they want from you and start asking what you want for yourself. I gave her my card. I still carry them, though I barely use them anymore. If you want to talk, call me. I've been where you are. I know what it's like. She took the card, looking uncertain but curious. I walked away, letting her have space to process, and suddenly, I knew how to end the memoir. The book ended like this. I don't know if my story is remarkable, but I know it's true. And I know there are countless versions of it happening right now, people who've made themselves indispensable in ways that trap them, people who've learned to navigate systems by being complicit in their preservation. To those people, I want to say, you can choose differently. Not easily, not without risk, but choosing transformation over preservation is possible. It requires being willing to demand more than you're offered. It requires building systems that don't depend on hidden knowledge. It requires understanding that your value isn't determined by how much you can tolerate, but by what you can create. It requires recognizing that being fired, being discarded, being told you're no longer needed. These endings can also be thresholds, moments when the systems that sustained you reveal their fragility, and you suddenly have permission to build something better. I spent 15 years maintaining hidden architecture that served other people's purposes. I've spent the years since building transparent infrastructure that serves everyone, including myself. The second version is harder. It requires more courage, more vision, more willingness to disappoint people who've gotten comfortable with you playing a certain role. But it's also freedom. And freedom, I've learned, is worth every uncomfortable negotiation, every risk, every moment of uncertainty. The systems we inherit aren't permanent. They can be transformed. And the person who transforms them doesn't have to be exceptional. They just have to be willing. Willing to see what's broken. Willing to imagine something better. Willing to demand it, even when the easier path is simply to accept what's offered. That's what I learned from being fired at 50 years old by a woman half my age who didn't understand what her father had built. I learned that endings are also beginnings. And I learned that the most important question isn't what do they want from me, but what do I want for myself? Everything else follows from answering that question honestly. The book published 2 years later. It found its audience, not bestseller lists, but the people who needed it. I heard from women who'd spent decades being indispensable in ways that kept them trapped, from people who'd navigated the gray spaces between complicity and control, from younger workers trying to figure out how to be valuable without becoming imprisoned by their value. The message was simple, but radical. You don't have to accept the systems you inherit. You can transform them. Vivian wrote the foreword. She talked about what she'd learned from firing me, from being forced to confront the fragility of what her father had built, from rebuilding it alongside someone who demanded better. This book, she wrote, is about more than business transformation. It's about personal transformation, about recognizing when survival strategies become traps, about having the courage to choose freedom over familiarity, even when freedom is terrifying. 20 years after the firing, I stood in my sister's backyard at a family gathering. My daughter Lucia was there with her partner and their 2 children. My mom, now in her 80s, held court in a lawn chair surrounded by grandchildren and great-grandchildren. Nadia found me standing alone, watching the chaos with contentment. You did it, she said simply. Did what? Broke the pattern. All those generations of women in our family who learned to survive by being indispensable, by maintaining systems that trapped them. You figured out how to transform it instead. I thought about my grandmother, my mom, my sister, myself, all the ways we'd learned to navigate systems built by others, for others, all the compromises we'd made in service of stability. I don't know if I broke it, I said, but maybe I bent it enough that Lucia and her generation can finish the work. That's all any of us can do, bend things towards something better, and trust the next generation to keep bending. Later, as the sun set and the gathering started to wind down, Lucia approached me. I've been thinking about your book, she said, about the choice you made. And I work with so many women who are stuck in versions of what you described. Not in businesses, but in families, in communities, in systems that require their silence to function. I want to help them see that they have choices, that being indispensable isn't the same as being valued. You're already doing that work. I know, but I want to do it more intentionally. Build programs, create resources, train people to recognize when they're trapped in being indispensable. She smiled. I guess I inherited your need to transform systems. Better from me than from your grandfather. We both laughed, and in that laughter was acknowledgement of all the complexity, the gratitude and the critique, the appreciation and the determination to do better. 25 years after the firing, I received an unexpected email. It was from the woman I'd met outside the office building years ago, the one holding a box of her belongings. You probably don't remember me, she wrote, but you gave me your card when I got fired 5 years ago. I finally understand what you meant about using knowledge to build something different, instead of just finding another job like the one I lost. I started a consulting firm helping companies document their hidden systems and transition them to transparent infrastructure. We work with businesses going through leadership changes, helping them avoid the fragility that comes from depending on hidden knowledge. I named the company Threshold Consulting, because that's what you taught me that day, that endings are thresholds, and transformation is always possible if you're willing to demand it. Thank you for seeing me when I felt invisible, for planting a seed that took years to germinate, but eventually changed everything. I read the email 3 times, each time feeling the particular joy that comes from realizing your impact extends beyond what you can see directly. That evening, I wrote back, I do remember you. And I remember being exactly where you were, holding a box, feeling discarded, not yet understanding that I was standing at a threshold. Thank you for doing the work, for taking the lessons and extending them, transforming them into something that serves others. That's how change actually happens. Not through individual breakthrough, but through shared commitment to building better systems. Keep going. The work matters. The story ends here, though of course my life continued beyond this point. But this felt like the natural completion. 25 years from firing to understanding that transformation is never just personal. It's always about creating conditions for others to transform too. I learned eventually that the most important thing I could do wasn't to be indispensable. It was to build systems where no one needed to be indispensable, where knowledge was shared, where power was distributed, where transformation was always possible. I learned that endings are thresholds, that being fired can be liberation, that demanding better is always an option, even when survival instincts scream to accept what's offered. And I learned that the difference between complicity and control isn't about whether you participate in systems. We all do. It's about whether you work to preserve those systems or transform them. I chose transformation. It was harder, riskier, more uncertain than preservation would have been, but it was also freedom. And freedom, I learned, is worth everything.